Some winters begin without warning, a breath in the cold, a sound softened by snow, a moment you don't realize you'll keep forever. They say memory drifts like snowfall, light, quiet, returning to the places where warmth once lived. And sometimes, in the hush of a winter morning, you find yourself standing in an old version of your own world, one where everything felt simpler, softer, brighter than you remember. This is the story of the days that stayed, the one that settled gently on the heart and never melted away. This is winter's last melody, the days that stayed. Some memories don't feel like memories at first. They feel like small, ordinary moments, until time turns them into something brighter. Haru remembered the hall that day, the warmth of the heaters, the way snow drifted lazily outside the tall windows, softening the world beyond the glass. He had just entered the building, boots still dusted with white, not really sure which club to join, only knowing that the winter made him want to try something warm and quiet. That's when he saw him. Ren stood behind the small wooden table with a handmade sign, Music Box Craft Club, Beginner's Welcome. He wasn't calling out to students like the other clubs. He wasn't flashy or loud or even trying to recruit. He was simply focused, turning a tiny wooden gear between his fingers, examining it with a kind of gentle concentration that made the whole noisy hall feel quieter. Haru slowed down. Ren's scarf was wrapped too high, covering half his face. But his eyes were soft, steady, warm in a way Haru didn't expect from a stranger. Ren looked up, sensing someone had stopped in front of the table. Just for a moment, their eyes met. Haru opened his mouth to say something, anything, but Ren spoke first, voice quiet and shy. You can try making one. The music boxes, I mean. If you want. It wasn't a sales pitch, not even close. It was an invitation said the way Ren did, everything at that age. Something in Haru melted a little. He stepped closer, drawn in by the warmth of the scene. The wooden pieces lined neatly in trays. The soft ticking sound of a tiny metal spring, Ren's breath fogging slightly as cold air from the hallway drifted in. Haru reached for a small wooden box. Ren's finger brushed his by accident, and just like that, the memory opened, bright and quiet, exactly the way Haru chose to keep it. Haru remembers sitting down before he even decided to. Ren had pulled a chair out for him, awkwardly, shyly, as if unsure whether it was the right thing to do. Haru sat. Ren exhaled, relieved. Between them, the beginner music box kit waited. A small wooden casing, 4 tiny gears, a metal comb wrapped in paper. Ren cleared his throat softly. You start with this one, he said, picking up the first gear. It's easy, I mean, maybe not too easy, but you'll get it. His voice was gentle, almost careful. The kind of tone people use when they want you to feel welcome. Haru watched his hands move, steady, precise, yet somehow nervous too. He mirrored the motion, picking up the same piece. Their elbows brushed, neither pulled away. Ren leaned a little closer to point at the slot on the wooden frame. Here, Haru fitted the gear into place. It clicked softly. Ren's eyes brightened, not dramatically, just enough for Haru to notice. Perfect, Ren murmured, almost proud, and Haru, surprised by the warmth blooming in his chest, smiled without thinking. Ren noticed, looked away quickly, then back again. But somehow, that moment lingered. Ren handed him the second piece, fingertips brushing his. Haru tightened the tiny screw. Ren steadied the box so it wouldn't wobble. Their hands worked in a quiet harmony. The last gear slid neatly into place. Ren let out a soft breath, a laugh almost too small to hear. See? You're good at this. Haru shook his head. You just explained it really well. Ren's ears turned pink. He didn't deny it. He didn't look away this time. For the first time that winter, Haru felt something shift. A gentle, warming tug inside him. The beginning of a melody he would remember for years. The snow outside thickened, blurring the world to white. Inside, the music box took its shape, and so did something else. Some people don't enter your life slowly. They arrive, and before you know it, your days begin to bend toward them, without effort, without fear, without thinking. Haru remembers in its flashes, bright, warm, quiet pieces of a winter that felt kinder than the ones before it. Ren waiting for him outside the clubroom, hands tucked into his sleeves because he forgot gloves again. The two of them walking across campus was the kind of closeness that didn't need explanation, carrying the same pace, the same quiet comfort. The way Ren would look at the music box part was deep focus, and Haru would study him instead, learning more from the curve of Ren's expression than the lesson itself, and how Ren always seemed relieved when Haru showed up again the next day. Ren offered Haru the warm can of cocoa from the vending machine. It's cold, so here. Evenings where they stayed too long in the clubroom, the heater humming, the campus outside turning blue with early night cold, and neither of them wanting to leave first. It happened fast, faster than anything in Haru's life up to that point. One winter, and Ren was suddenly the person he saw everywhere. Looking back, Haru often felt this was when they became one. Just two boys who didn't know how not to be around each other. The campus pass was nearly empty by the time they left the clubroom. Evening had turned the snow pale blue, and the lamps glowed in a small halos that trembled with the wind. Haru walked a little slower than usual, not because he was tired, but because Ren was next to him, close enough that their sleeves brushed now and then. A patch of ice caught Haru off guard. He slipped, just half a step, but Ren reacted before either of them had time to think. A hand at Haru's wrist. Haru regained balance, but Ren didn't let go right away. His fingers stayed where they were, not gripping, not pulling, just there. Haru's pulse flickered in his chest, surprised at how much a touch could feel like being seen. The snowfall thickened, each flake drifting slower, heavier, as if the world was trying to give them a moment. Ren's hand loosened, just slightly, as if about to retreat. Haru didn't move. His fingers shifted, only a small adjustment, barely noticeable, but enough for Ren's hand to settle into his, their palms aligning underneath. For a second, nothing happened, and then everything did. Ren's fingers curled softly around his. Not a bold hold, a shy one, a beginning. No one else was on the pass, no club members heading home, no couples passing by, just the two of them, and the sound of a snow touching ground. They were supposed to split at the courtyard. That was the routine. Haru toward the dorms, Ren toward the station. But after the handhold, neither of them loosened their fingers when the crossroad arrived. Haru slowed down. Ren matched him. Haru turned left. Ren followed. Neither said anything about it. The snow started falling heavier, each flake tapping softly on the hood of Ren's jacket. Haru glanced sideways. You're soaked, he said, voice warm with concern. You want to come in? Just for a bit? To warm up? Ren nodded too quickly, a little embarrassed, a little relieved. Inside Haru's small dorm room, the air smelled faintly of laundry and instant miso. He turned on the small floor heater, its orange coils glowing softly. Ren sat across from him on the floor, legs tucked in, steam rising from his breath. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. A long moment passed where they just listened to the heater hum. Ren's knee brushed Haru's once, then again. Then they both pretended not to move closer. Haru handed him a towel for his hair. Ren used it clumsily. Haru laughed softly. Ren looked up with pink cheeks, towel half covering his face. Sorry, Ren murmured. For what? Ren shrugged. For everything, I guess. Haru shook his head. Something softened in the air. The heater's warmth spread across the room. Ren's fingertips inched closer along the floor, stopping just beside Haru's hand without touching. Haru felt his breast catch, not out of fear, but because it felt inevitable. You okay? Haru asked quietly. Ren nodded. I just don't want to go back out yet. Then don't, Haru said. And he meant it. Ren's shoulder relaxed for the first time since they came inside. They ended up sitting shoulder to shoulder, back against Haru's narrow bed, sharing the same blanket. The snow outside kept falling. The night kept deepening, but neither of them moved toward the door. Ren leaned just slightly, his head almost touching Haru's. Haru felt the warmth of him, like something fragile and new. Is it okay if I stay a little longer? Ren whispered. Haru didn't look at him. He didn't need to. Yeah, he said, voice soft. Stay. And Ren did. The blanket shifted. Their shoulders pressed closer. Their hands, which had been resting separately, began drifting again, slowly, naturally, until Ren's finger found Haru's under the fold of the fabric. Haru felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been held tightly for weeks without a name. They stayed like that, shoulders touching, hands hidden but held, their breasts brushing the same small pocket of air. Haru turned slightly toward him. Ren mirrored him without thinking. The room felt smaller. The space between them felt careful, fragile, full. Ren looked at Haru for just a second too long. The kind of second that says everything without sound. Haru's breast caught. Ren noticed, and that noticing brought him closer. Not all at once, just a slow lean, like gravity was choosing for them. Haru didn't move away. Their foreheads brushed first, a quiet, accidental touch. Ren inhaled shakily. Haru exhaled like he'd been waiting for this without knowing. Ren leaned the rest of the way. Their lips met softly, barely there, a feather-light touch, a nervous press, a first kiss that felt like stepping into warm light after standing in the cold too long. Ren made a tiny sound, and it pulled Haru closer without thinking. They parted by only a breath. Ren's lashes trembled. Haru swallowed, heart unsteady and full. Then Haru leaned in again. This time the kiss landed with intention. Ren's hand lifted from under the blanket and cupped Haru's cheek, thumb brushing once. They didn't rush. They didn't deepen. They simply held the moment, as if it was something delicate and rare. When they finally pulled apart, foreheads still touching, their breasts mixed in the narrow space between them. Ren kept his hand on Haru's cheek. Haru covered it with his own, holding it there. Their lips, still warm from the kiss. The blanket slipped from their shoulders. They didn't notice. Ren shifted closer, his knees brushing Haru's, his breast trembling with something new. Not fear, not uncertainty, just the unfamiliar weight of wanting. Haru lifted a hand, hesitating for only a heartbeat, before touching Ren's jaw, his fingers tracing along warm skin, like he was learning a shape he always wondered about. Ren's eyes fluttered shut at the touch. Haru leaned in again, their lips meeting with a little more certainty. a little more want. Still slow, still gentle, but carrying a warmth that spread through the room, like the quiet glow of the heater. They stayed close like that for a long time, kissing softly, carefully, with the hesitant confidence of two people who had never done this before. But they knew, instinctively, how to be gentle with each other. Ren shifted, and Haru led him, their bodies aligning in a way that felt natural, like they were finding a place that had always been waiting. Haru's hand slid to Ren's shoulder. Ren's fingers curled into Haru's sweater. Their breasts tangled, their hearts caught. They paused once, the tiniest moment of stillness, where both of them seemed to ask wordlessly, "Is this okay?" Haru nodded first, barely noticeable, but enough. Ren answered by leaning in again, his forehead resting against Haru's, as their lips met in a slow, trembling kiss that deepened by emotion alone. The room felt warm, the world felt soft. Their closeness unfolded piece by piece, gentle touches, the kind of warmth two first-timers find when they are learning someone they care for. They held each other like it was the most natural thing they ever done, learning warmth, learning closeness, learning each other, with a tenderness that didn't need to be explained. Winter didn't change all at once. It changed in small ways, quiet ways, the kind that never feel like a beginning until you look back. After the first night, Ren started staying over often. At first it was once a week, then twice. Then it became so natural that Haru found himself leaving a spare toothbrush in the cup beside his own, without thinking about it. Ren laughed when he saw it, a soft, embarrassed sound, but he never moved it. Kisses becoming part of their routine, a greeting, a good night, a pause between words, each one soft and tentative at first, then deeper, then something that neither of them questioned anymore. Some nights, their closeness deepened in the shy, careful way of two first-timers, learning warmth with hands and breath rather than certainty. A memory folded into light and quiet, the room dimming into something tender and unspoken. Rumors drifted through the campus like early snow, but neither boy cared. They walked past whispers with fingers brushing, with smiles they couldn't hide, with a closeness that didn't need permission. Between classes and cold mornings, they spent hours in the music box room, the scent of wood shavings, a metallic click of tiny gears, the soft glow of the lamp above their workspace. Haru worked quietly on his project, a box carved with two small trees inside, their branches leaning just close enough to touch. He sanded them carefully, traced the shape again and again, until the wood felt like a memory under his fingers. Ren sat beside him, tongue between his teeth in concentration, working on something of his own. One late afternoon, with snow drifting lazily outside the frosted window, Ren finished his box. He held it out awkwardly. "Here." Haru blinked at him, surprised. Ren's box wasn't perfect, the carving slightly uneven, the figures a little simple, but inside, two tiny shapes held hands. "It's us," Ren muttered, face going pink. Haru's heart tightened in a way he didn't have words for. He opened his mouth, felt the weight of the box in his hands, felt Ren's hope like a soft light beside him, and froze. His own project sat unfinished beside him, not perfect enough, not ready, not good enough to give back. He hesitated, just a second, but it was enough. Ren's expression flickered, barely there, a small crack in his smile before he pulled it back together. "I just wanted you to have it." Haru forced a smile. Ren nodded, but the moment had already shifted, just a little, a faint shadow where only warmth had been. The snow outside thickened, blurring the world to white. Ren moved closer again, and Haru leaned into him, letting the warmth return. The air felt clear somehow, sharp, bright, filled with the quiet buzz of something unspoken between them. They walked together toward the courtyard, the same way they had always did, shoulders brushing every few steps, hands grazing. Ren looked tired from studying, eyes soft, hair pushed back messily under his beanie. He kept stealing glances at Haru. Whenever he thought Haru wasn't looking, Haru noticed everything. At the courtyard, their paths split. Haru toward his dorm, Ren toward the station. They stopped without needing to say why. The snow fell lightly, dusting Ren's scarf and lashes. "See you tomorrow," Ren asked. Haru nodded. Ren smiled, a small relieved curve of his lips, and turned to go. Haru watched him take a few steps, just a few. Then Ren paused. He turned back, eyes meeting Haru's across the quiet courtyard. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a grand gesture. Just a soft look that said everything they hadn't found words for yet. Haru's hand tightened on the strap of his bag. Ren's fingers flexed at his side, like he almost reached out again. Neither of them moved closer. Neither stepped away. The snow kept falling between two boys standing in a silence that didn't feel empty at all. Ren gave a tiny nod. Haru answered with one of his own. Then they walked their separate routes. But both kept turning back, just once more, and then once again, until the path curved and the other was out of sight. Some winters don't arrive with memory. They arrive with change, a shift in the air, a new warmth in an ordinary day, a color you didn't expect to see. They say life turns slowly in your mid-20s. Quiet mornings, familiar routines, days blending into the next. But sometimes, without warning, someone steps into the stillness, and the world feels different. It wasn't a moment meant to stay, just a winter afternoon, a thrift store, and a stranger who carried the kind of brightness you notice before you understand why. This is winter's last melody, the colors that found me. After graduation, Haru split his days between his grandfather's farm in Biei and home in Otaru. The work was steady, familiar, the kind of life everyone assumed he would settle into. But that winter, with the fields quiet and covered in snow, something in him felt restless. He began taking the train into Sapporo on his free days, just to see more of the world than the one he'd grown up inside. That was when he spotted it. A small thrift shop on the side street, warm light spilling onto the snow. A hiring flyer taped to the window. Haru paused without knowing why. Maybe it was the warmth. Maybe the colors inside. Maybe something else entirely. He stepped inside. Warm air wrapped around him immediately. Old wood, worn fabric, and the clean, calming scent of hinoki drifting from the small diffuser behind the counter. The man behind the counter looked up, eyes bright, expressive, already assessing him. "I saw the hiring flyer outside." "Oh, you're here for the job." He leaned in, elbows on the counter. "Great. We actually need someone. Let's see." "You're wearing a lot of brown." Haru blinked back. "Is that a problem?" The man pointed at him like he was highlighting evidence. Brown coat, brown sweater, brown scarf, and brown bag. "Did you do that on purpose? Or did Brown win the fight this morning?" Haru flushed slightly, caught between amusement and embarrassment. "I wasn't trying to match anything." The man nodded in a mock serious way. "By the way, I'm Itsuki. Coat off. I have to make sure you can reach shelves." Haru hesitated briefly, then took off his coat. Itsuki watched him, not rudely, just observant. Then he nodded. "Perfect. You'll do." Haru blinked. "Wait, you're hiring me?" Isuki laughed. Absolutely not. I have zero authority. He tapped the counter twice. But I can put in a very confident good word. Haru didn't know why. But that was the moment the shop felt a little warmer. The moment something shifted. And the moment color began inching into the edges of his winter. Itsuki pulled out a deep green knit. This. Hold still. Before Haru could react, Itsuki stepped right into his space and lifted the sweater against Haru's chest, tilting his head to study it. Haru felt his breast catch, not dramatically, just enough that he hoped Itsuki didn't notice. Itsuki definitely noticed. He murmured. Green wakes you up. You have good skin, but the brown is killing it softly. Haru stared at the sweater instead of Itsuki's face. Is this part of the interview? You could say that, Itsuki replied, swapping the sweater for an olive turtleneck, and also our customer service. We need to look approachable. His eyes flicked back to Haru's brown sweater. Not like we're blending into a wooden floor. Haru couldn't help it. He let out a small laugh. Isuki froze for half a second. Then he smiled, slow and satisfied, the way someone smiles when a puzzle piece clicks. There it is, he said. Much better. Haru blinked. What is? Your laugh. I just needed to see what color it was. Haru stared at him, unsure how to respond. Isuki didn't wait for an answer. He held up a maroon cardigan next. No, this is too heavy. All right, try that green one I gave you. You mean change right here? Why not? Isuki cut in. Are you afraid I'll judge your fashion choices? He smirked. Don't worry, I already did that at the door. Haru sighed. I'll use the fitting room, he said firmly. Come on, I need to see the color on you. Haru hesitated. He exhaled softly. Fine. He pulled his brown sweater over his head, folding it neatly in his hands. Isuki's eyebrows lifted. Oh wow, he murmured. You actually have a body under all that brown. That's good to know. Haru ignored that, slipping the green knit over his head. When he looked up, Isuki was watching him with a surprising seriousness. That is your color, Isuki said quietly. Haru blinked, thrown off by the sincerity, smiling before he realized he was doing it. Isuki pointed at Haru with a quick triumphant gesture. There it is again. That smile. That's the second time today. Haru stiffened slightly. I smile all the time. No, you smile politely all the time. This one, you're not hiding it. Before Haru could react, the shop doorbell chimed at the entrance. A customer walked in. Isuki leaned close enough that Haru felt a brush of warm air near his cheek. Watch and learn, he whispered lightly. And just like that, Haru's winter began to change color. At home, his grandfather called it irresponsible, and his parents called it a phase. But the warmth he found here, the way Itsuki moved through winter like he could blend the cold into something bright, made Haru feel for the first time that he wasn't running away from his life, but towards something he hadn't known he was allowed to want. Winter settled into rhythm before Haru even noticed it happening. Days in the shop passed quietly, stitched together by small routines. The sound of hangers sliding across racks, the soft scrape of Izuki's scissors trimming loose threads, the slow, steady warmth rising from the old heater by the window. Some afternoons, Haru would glance up from a book and find Itsuki hunched over a worn coat, patching fabric with the kind of intensity that made the whole room seem to pause. Other days, portfolio pages lay open across the counter, bright colors layered with a confidence Haru never would have imagined for himself. It was easy somehow, falling into step beside him, working in comfortable silence, sharing warm tea during breaks, watching snow drift down the glass as the days folded quietly into one another. And every night, when the lamps dimmed and the shop finally closed, they walked together toward the station. Haru waited at the Otaru-bound platform, while Itsuki stood a step behind him, hands deep in his pockets, as if deciding whether to say something he never quite voiced. The train always arrived too soon. The doors always closed before Haru could linger. And whenever he looked back through the window, Itsuki was still there. The season split itself in two around him. Sapporo days filled with swarms and noise. Otaru nights wrapped in quiet and cold. Two different worlds. And slowly, quietly, Itsuki began to fill the space between them. Snow pressed softly against the window, muffling the city beyond it. Itsuki suddenly straightened, untied his apron, and turned toward Haru with a brightness that didn't match the gray outside. Haru blinked in surprise. Do you know what today is? Haru paused mid-fold. Itsuki pointed at Haru with a kind of theatrical urgency. Today makes 1 month. Exactly since you started here. Haru opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Itsuki continued. And because you haven't run away yet. And because you fought better than my last 3 co-workers combined. And because... His voice softened, just a touch. You make the shop nicer to walk into every day. We need to celebrate. Celebrate what? Itsuki didn't miss a beat. The fact you're still here. Which means dinner tonight. Haru blinked once, twice. He could feel the cold waiting outside the door. He could picture the train timetable he always checked. He could hear his own quiet habits whispering the predictable choice. But something about the way Itsuki looked at him, like he'd been waiting for this day, tilted the moment. Haru exhaled softly. Dinner. Itsuki grinned. Yeah, dinner. You're buying. And I'll buy the beer after. And just like that, winter shifted again. Dinner passed in blur. Warm dishes, low lights. The kind of laughter Haru didn't realize he was capable of sharing with someone he hadn't known for long. Maybe it was the heater. Maybe the food. Maybe the beer Itsuki insisted on ordering. It wasn't until they stood to leave that Haru realized the bill was already gone. It's our anniversary, Itsuki said. There was something in the way he said it. Light, but sincere. Whatever the reason, Haru felt lighter as they stepped back into the night. The cold hit instantly. They walked. The city had quieted, snow falling in thin silver lines under the street lights. Haru felt the warmth from dinner fading too fast, slipping from his hands first. Instinctively, he curled his fingers into his sleeves. Itsuki noticed. He always did. Seriously, he bumped Haru's shoulder. You didn't bring gloves? Itsuki stepped in front of him. Give me your hands. Haru hesitated only for a second before offering them. Itsuki wrapped Haru's fingers in his own, palms warm and certain. He didn't rush, didn't joke, didn't smirk. He simply breathed against Haru's knuckles, slow and steady, until warmth spread into Haru's skin like something intentional, something deliberate, something meant. A quiet shift pulsed through Haru's chest. Itsuki didn't let go. He guided one of Haru's hands into the pocket of his coat, slipping his own hand in after it. Their fingers curled naturally, held securely in the small shared space. There, Itsuki murmured, low from the beer and the cold and the closeness. Haru's pulse stilled, then rushed in a quiet dizzy arc. The restaurant's warmth was gone. The city was silent around them. But here, in this pocket, in this borrowed heat, something settled and flared all at once. Whatever it was, Haru felt the spark move fast. They reached a narrow street that branched off toward the station, the one Haru always took. But tonight, he didn't turn immediately. A soft glow spilled from a tiny bar nearby. Haru paused, just for a breath. Itsuki stopped beside him, breath rising in soft clouds. You okay? He asked, voice low from the cold and the drinks. Haru nodded. He meant it. He wasn't cold anymore. He wasn't tired, just warm in places, He hadn't felt warm in a long time. Isuki stepped a little closer, not enough to startle, just enough that Haru felt the shift in the air. You don't have to rush home, Isuki said softly. That sentence brushed something loose inside Haru. Snow drifted between them, catching in Haru's hair, melting against Isuki's coat. For a moment, the city faded into a kind of winter hush. Isuki reached up, brushing a stray snowflake from Haru's cheek with the back of his knuckle. It was nothing, a tiny touch, barely anything at all, but it was enough. Haru couldn't tell who leaned in first, or how close they were before that moment. All he remembered was the warmth, Isuki's breast mixing with his, the faint taste of winter air between them, snow melting on their lips as one heartbeat slipped quietly into another. The kiss wasn't slow or hesitant. It wasn't careful. It wasn't shy. It was sudden, fast enough that Haru only caught the shape of it. The press of mouses, Isuki's hand slipping behind his neck, the way Haru's fingers curled instinctively into the front of Isuki's coat. Haru's mind didn't capture the details, just the impact. And when they finally pulled apart, breathing lightly, the street felt different. Isuki's eyes lingered on Haru. You're not going home, he murmured. It wasn't a question, not a command, just a truth hanging in the cold. Haru didn't answer. He didn't need to, because whatever had just sparked had already shifted his night in a direction that didn't include train tracks, timetables, or Otaru. Just snow, warmth, and the boy standing in front of him, and the door of whatever came next. Isuki unlocked the apartment door with one hand, while the other stayed wrapped around Haru's wrist. The hurried click of the lock, the warmth rushing out from the entryway. And then, the moment the door shut behind them, everything changed speed. Isuki pressed him against it, the kind of kiss that stole the leftover cold from Haru's lips, the kind that didn't ask for permission, because the permission was already in the way Haru's melted into it. Haru tried to shrug off his coat, but Isuki caught the collar, pushing it back from his shoulders in one smooth motion. The coat hit the floor. Their breath tangled. Snow melted down the back of Haru's neck as Isuki kissed him again. It felt like being pulled into warmth too quickly, too completely, like stepping out of a winter and straight into a blaze. Isuki murmured something Haru didn't fully hear, already tugging him forward by the front of his sweater. They barely made it past the entryway. Haru stumbled a step, only to be caught at the waist. Itsuki's hands were warm, decisive, sliding on the fabric, pulling him closer. Haru caught the glow of a small lamp and the faint hollow of the heater. But even in the low light, Haru could feel the brightness in Itsuki, the urgency, the hunger, the certainty of someone who knew what he wanted the moment he touched it. Their mouths met again, stronger, deeper, no hesitation anywhere in it. Haru's back hit the wall softly. Isuki's fingers tangled in his hair. Shirts lifted, half tugged, half pulled. Hands searching greedy and warm. The kind of closeness that didn't come in slow steps. It came in urges, in rushes, in heat that didn't want to wait for understanding. Haru didn't remember the order of things. Not the exact moment they made it to the mattress. Not which kiss blurred into which touch. Not when his breast turned into something soft and unsteady in the dark. He remembered only the feelings. Isuki above him, looking down with heat in his eyes, with a hunger that pulled at him, with a kind of gravity Haru couldn't resist. The night answered for him. All he knew was the heat of the moment, the rush of being wanted, the collapse of distance between two bodies moving fast and without hesitation, and somewhere in the blur, in the rise and fall of warmth, in the urgency that didn't slow down, in the breathless press of skin, Haru felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. The world outside was winter. Inside, the night burned. The weeks that followed slipped in quietly. A few nights blurred into several, several turned into most. And before Haru realized it, their closeness had woven itself into the rhythm of the season. Some evenings, he stayed after closing, sitting on the counter while Itsuki finished repairs, the heater washing warm air over them as Sapporo darkened outside. Other nights, they walked together without discussing plans, their bodies turning in the same direction, steps falling into the same pace. Then one night, with the blinds half drawn, and snow pressed against the window like a second curtain, they slipped into the changing room. He didn't remember how they ended up pressed together, just the heat of being pulled close. The way Itsuki kissed him, like the day had been waiting for it. The way winter stayed outside the door, while something much hotter filled the room. After that, the shop became part of their story too. A kiss stolen behind the curtain, when the street outside was empty. A breast shared in the dark seam of the repair table. The kind of intimacy that didn't fit into daylight, but found room anyway. And as the weeks went on, Haru's world shifted around those moments. But beneath the warmth, something else stirred. A quiet ache. A sense that closeness this fast carried shadow he wasn't ready to look at yet. Still he stayed, night after night. They planned the Otaru trip. It began lightly, almost carelessly. They took the afternoon train, windows fogging as the coastline blurred into long stretches of white. Itsuki leaned into the glass, eyes bright at each passing harbor town, cheeks warming from the heater. Haru found himself watching the reflection of that brightness more than the scenery outside. Otaru was cold in a way Sapporo rarely was. Sea wind cold, the kind that wrapped around the bones. They walked the canal first. Lamplight brushed the water with gold. Snow drifted gently, collecting in folds of their scarves. Itsuki slowed his pace, taking in the rows of warehouses, the stone arches, the quiet afternoon hum. Further down, a faint melody threaded through the street, a row of music box stalls. Itsuki lingered there. Haru watched him without asking. They wandered a little longer. By the time they reached the platform entrance, an electronic chime sounded overhead. A scrolling notice lit the signboard in harsh red. All trains operations suspended. Lines to Sapporo temporarily halted due to the severe weather. Itsuki stared at it, shoulders lifting with a small exhale he didn't fully release. Haru glanced at the storm building across the tracks, snow swallowing the far end of the line, wind bending into long arcs. There was no choice. He turned gently toward Itsuki. The decision didn't need words. A short walk later, Haru unlocked the door to his home. Warm air drifted out. Itsuki stepped inside slowly, brushing snow from his hair, his gloves, the hem of his coat. Haru's mother stepped out from the kitchen, surprised for only a heartbeat before her gaze shifted to the storm outside the window. Itsuki bowed quietly. Haru's mother hid a small smile and stepped aside so they could pass. Her voice followed. "Tea will be ready." Haru gave a small nod of gratitude, then opened his bedroom door. Itsuki stepped in silently. Haru's room held its usual warmth, books lined neatly, heater humming gently, the faint scent of laundry still clinging to the air. Itsuki set his bag down and paused. His eyes had caught something on the shelf. A small wooden box, soft edges, gently worn. The carved silhouette of two trees touching at their branches. Without asking, he reached for it. He turned the key once. A quiet melody filled into the room. Haru stood still, watching the way Itsuki's expression shifted. Then came a faint knock. The door slid open just enough for Haru's mother to slip inside, hands steady around the tray of tea. She set the tray on Haru's desk. When she left, closing the door softly behind her, the room grew still again. Just the music. Haru watched him, something tightening gently in his chest. Before he could stop himself, the words slipped out. Do you want it? Izuki looked up, surprised. He lifted the box fully into his hands. He didn't know what the box meant. He didn't know what winter lived inside it. But he accepted it, and Haru let him. Izuki looked at the music box again, then at Haru. Thank you. I like it. When the last note faded, Izuki finally exhaled. There's something I need to tell you. I got a job offer in Tokyo. The words landed quietly, without decoration. Haru blinked. Tokyo, designer position, Izuki said. Silence moved between them. When? A week. The heater hummed. Snow pressed harder against the siding. Haru stepped forward. Come here. Izuki didn't smirk this time. He simply moved. Haru wrapped his arm around him, holding him fully, steadily. A careful, anchoring embrace. Izuki leaned in, exhaling against Haru's shoulder, fingertips curling into the back of Haru's sweater as if steadying himself. Haru held him a little tighter, and Izuki let himself be held. Some winters don't end when the season changes. They settle quietly in the place we leave behind, in the corners of a station, in the breast between two people, in the words we couldn't say. They say time softened the things we run from, but sometimes it only makes the memory sharper. A smile you couldn't hold on to, a hand you let slip, a warmth you didn't know how to keep. And when the years begin to blur, you look back and realize there were winters you tried to carry and winters you tried to forget, but they all return eventually. This is winter's last melody, the winters we let go. Haru and Ren didn't fall apart all at once. They drifted the way seasons do, a little colder here, a little quieter there, until the distance between them became something they could feel but couldn't name. But before any of that, there were nights in the university hall when Haru leaned into Ren's shoulder, eyes half-lidded with exhaustion, feeling the steady shape of Ren's breathing through his jacket. There were kisses stolen behind the music building, the kind given in soft rushes, both hopeful and terrified, the kind that made Haru smile against Ren's lips before pulling away too soon. There were mornings when Ren tugged Haru's scarf a little tighter, thumb brushing the edge of Haru's jaw, a gesture so small it almost didn't count, except it did, because Haru felt it long after Ren let go. There were afternoons in cafes where their knees touched under the table, and they pretended not to notice, and late evenings where Ren walked Haru home through Sapporo's quiet back streets, snow settling in their hair like dust from a gentler world. And there were the silences, the good ones, the kind when Haru rested his forehead against Ren's shoulder, and Ren read him a passage from some book he liked. And nothing needed to be said, because nothing felt missing. But time began doing what time always does. The days started blending into one another. Classes, part-time shifts, exams, all the things they thought they could outrun. Their messages got shorter. Their laughter softened. Plans got postponed. Because, let's just meet tomorrow. And tomorrow kept moving. Sometimes Haru waited for Ren to show up, fingers wrapped around the warm drink, watching the steam rise into the cold as shadow lengthened. Sometimes Ren arrived late with an excuse. Sometimes he didn't arrive at all. Still Haru held on. Ren did too. But something in the air shifted. Something neither of them said out loud. Something they pretended wasn't happening. The kind of change you only notice in hindsight. One icy evening, as they crossed the street after grabbing snacks, a car took the corner too fast. Tires shrieking across black ice, metal groaning as it struggled against the slide. Haru froze. Ren grabbed his wrist, pulling him back onto the sidewalk. You okay, Haru? Ren asked, breast clouding in front of him. Yeah, Haru lied. But even after the car drove away, Haru kept staring at the tracks it left behind in the snow. The winter Ren became a senior. Their passes didn't clash. Winter didn't steal anything from them. It simply made it clear the way Haru and Ren were beginning to move at different speeds. Ren laughed just as easily, touched Haru with the same tenderness, held him the same way during cold walks home. But the future, the thing Haru always held like a campus needle, began slipping out of reach. Everyone around Ren was planning internships, entrance exams, cities to move to. Their conversations were filled with nervous excitement and the feeling of a road bending clearly ahead. Ren listened, nodded, smiled. But whenever Haru asked him about his own plans, Ren's answer grew vague, half-formed. Let's just enjoy this year. Haru tried to match that ease, but something inside him, the part that needed grounding, the part that feared being left behind, tightened like a knot he couldn't loosen. Haru had already chosen his road. Even as a junior, he imagined finishing school, packing boxes, returning home to help run the grandpa's farm, continuing something that held his childhood, his roots, his sense of purpose. Ren knew all this. But Ren himself didn't have a plan. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Where Haru grew steadier, Ren drifted gently. He slept through morning classes, missed bus connections, wandered into Haru's arm without noticing how long Haru had been waiting. Haru didn't judge him for it. He never would. But the difference between them slowly became a weight Haru couldn't ignore. One day they sat in a cafe overlooking the snow-covered street. Ren stirred his drink, eyes following strangers outside, thoughts drifting like winter's wind. Haru watched him with a quiet ache. Ren was beautiful in those soft, unfocused moments. But Haru couldn't see where he was heading. They walked home afterward. But that night, Haru realized something he hadn't wanted to face. Ren lived inside the moment. Haru lived beyond it. Not because one was right and the other wrong, but because the space between them had shifted, and neither of them knew how to bend the road back. When Ren reached for Haru's hand near the station, Haru held it. Of course he did. Their fingers still fit easily, naturally, as if no time had changed them at all. But Haru also felt the truth settle quietly in his chest. Love wasn't the question. Timing was. And sometimes, timing is the thing that begins to break first. They entered the station together, side by side, as they had done hundreds of times before. The warmth from outside cafes and bus rides still clung faintly to their coats. But inside Sapporo Station, the air felt colder, sharper, as if it already knew what Haru was about to do. They stood near track 5, snow melting off their sleeves, voices of commuters weaving around them like distant waves. Ren nudged Haru's shoulder gently. What's on your mind? You've been quiet. He looked at Ren, really looked, and knew instantly. If he hesitated even a second, he wouldn't be able to say it at all. So he didn't hesitate. Ren, Haru began, voice steady in a way that scared even him. I don't think we should keep doing this. Ren blinked, stunned. Doing what? Haru's eyes didn't waver. Us. This. Being together. The words hit like a winter gust, brutal in how suddenly the warmth left the space between them. Ren stepped forward, confused, hurt. Haru, where is this coming from? Did I do something? Just tell me. Haru swallowed hard, the decision solidifying inside him. I'm choosing my path, and I don't know where you're going, and I don't think you know either. Ren reached for him. Haru stepped back. A train horn echoed through the platform. Haru's breast shook, just once, before he forced himself upright. I don't see you in me. Ren jerked as if it hit. Haru, wait! Haru turned. Not abruptly, just firmly enough to show he had already made the choice. He took 2 steps away, and Ren ran after him, arms wrapping around Haru from behind in a desperate, shaking embrace. Haru inhaled sharply at the sudden warmth, the familiar weight of Ren's hold, the way Ren buried his face against Haru's back, like he was afraid Haru might disappear if he let go. "Don't," Ren whispered, breast trembling. "Please, don't just walk away. We can't fix this. I can't fix this." Haru closed his eyes. The ache was unbearable. Ren's arm or memory wrapped around him. Every tenderness, every warmth, every night they had once shared. Haru pried Ren's hand off his coat, one finger at a time, until nothing was holding him anymore. He didn't turn around. His voice came out quiet. "I don't love you anymore." Ren staggered back a step. Haru exhaled, a breath that sounded like breaking. "I don't see myself in your world." A long silence filled the entire station around them. Ren didn't run after him again. Haru walked toward the exit without looking back, leaving the warmth of Ren's embrace and the last piece of their winter behind him on track 5. There are winters that stretches slowly, quiet, pale, unchanging. And then there are winters that rush into your life so suddenly, you don't remember how the world looked before them. Isuki arrived like that. Not loud, not demanding, just warm in a way Haru hadn't felt in a long time. After hearing about the Tokyo offer, Haru expected distance. He expected hesitation. He expected the beginning of an end. He didn't expect a week that felt like the world folding in around the two of them. Everything blurred together, not in a frantic way, but in the gentle, continuous haze of closeness. The thrift store became a small universe. The hum of the heater, the smell of old wood and fabric, Itsuki grinning as he placed a ridiculous hat on Haru's head, just to hear him laugh. They shared bowls of steaming ramen at night, sitting shoulder to shoulder, in a booth too small for 2 people. Isuki stealing Haru's chashu, Haru stealing it right back, their knees touching under the table like it was an accident that neither bothered to fix. Snow collected on their scarves as they walked home, Isuki brushing flakes from Haru's hair, with fingers that lingered a little too long. Haru didn't pull away. They kissed under a convenience store light, a sudden instinctive pull. Nights blurred into each other, their sweaters tossed onto the same chair, their laughters echoing softly against the apartment walls. Sometimes they stayed awake until dawn, talking about nothing, recipes Isuki wanted to try, colors he wanted to design with, places Haru remembered from Biei, the way fresh snow changed the sound of a highway. Sometimes they didn't talk at all. A kiss in the dark, hands finding each other under the blankets, a soft exhale against the collarbone, warm breast pressed into the hollow of a throat. Everything felt new, yet strangely familiar, as if their bodies were learning a language their hearts already understood. One evening, the storm outside made the windows rattle, snow swirling hard against the glass. Isuki lit a single candle on the kotatsu, its warm glow turning the room into something tender and unreal. Haru looked at him across the tiny flame and felt something inside shift. It was only a week, only a handful of days, but it moved through Haru's life like a season he hadn't realized he needed, a season he didn't know he was almost done with. The week had felt like season, bright, warm, unplanned, a rhythm that carried Haru before he even realized he moved. But this day arrived like the softest exhale, setting over them in a way that made the outside world seem unreal. Morning light slid through thin curtains, golden stripes painting the messy futon, where Haru and Itsuki lay in a tangle of blankets and half-whispered laughter. Isuki had packed most of his things the night before, his suitcase sat by the wall, Shirts and sketchbooks arranged neatly, the zipper half open like a held breath. Only a few items remained scattered around the apartment: a scarf, a charger, a pair of socks he couldn't find a match for, and a small pile of their clothes mixed together from the night before. Haru's sweater woven between Itsuki's jeans, their undershirts tangled like they'd been folded by the same hand. Itsuki glanced at the suitcase once that morning, then looked away quickly, as if acknowledging it would break something fragile. They spent the first hour draped in blankets. Itsuki curled into Haru's lap, Haru brushing soft lines along his jaw, with a tenderness he didn't realize he'd been holding back. When Itsuki finally sat up, hair messy, eyes bright from sleep, he said it casually, in the tone of someone asking for a pen or a charger. "Hey, can I have something of yours?" Haru blinked. "Like what?" Itsuki blushed, the faintest pink, smiling in the half-teasing, half-serious way he did when he was about to say something bold. "Your underwear." Haru's breast caught, not out of shock. "Why?" Haru asked softly, heat rising to his cheeks. Itsuki shrugged, eyes warm. "'Cause I want something that smells like you." The words landed deeper than Haru expected. He hesitated only a moment before sliding the waistband down, movement slow, breast a little shaky from the intimacy of it. He folded the fabric once, twice, and placed it into Itsuki Waiting's hand. Itsuki held it like something precious, thumb brushing the soft cotton, then smiled, a little shy, a little wicked. Then without a word, he slipped off his own underwear, quick and smooth, and offered it to Haru. "You keep mine." Haru didn't laugh. He couldn't. The gesture was too tender, too unexpectedly sincere, a warmth he felt in the back of his throat. He took the fabric carefully, as if accepting something fragile, pressed it to his chest for a moment. The exchange felt like a promise neither of them said loud. After that, the day moved softly around them, tea warming between their hands, Itsuki sketching Haru on a loose paper. Snow fell harder outside, turning the world into a blurred white quiet. Inside, Haru and Itsuki existed in a room that felt carved out of time. A small, warm universe, holding them just long enough to make goodbye feel impossible. It was only a one day, one suspended golden day, but it settled into Haru like a memory that would linger forever. They reached Sapporo station entrance. Itsuki shifted his bag higher on his shoulder, packed tight, only a scarf and a traded boxer speaking out of the side pocket. Haru noticed. His chest tightened. The street beside them hissed with sliding tires. A car skidded slightly on the ice before correcting, the driver honking sharply out the window. Itsuki flinched. Haru did too, but deeper, as if something inside him braced without understanding why. They stepped into the station's warm air, fluorescent lights, tiled floors, winter coats brushing past. Haru looked at the size of the bag, at the way Itsuki's hands were already red from the cold. "Are you sure you can manage all this to the airport?" His voice came out softer than he meant. "I can't help. I can go with you at least." Itsuki cut him off gently. "Haru, don't make it harder." The sentence dropped between them like a quiet snowfall, soft, but heavy when it lands. Haru blinked, caught off guard by the tenderness in it. "Itsuki." Every part of him wanted to reach out, just once more. But Itsuki exhaled, the long, steady kind of breaths people take when they've already made the decision they know will hurt. "Haru, listen. Don't take me wrong, but I'm not coming back here. Ever." For a second, Haru didn't understand the shape of the words. Then the meaning hit him all at once, sharp and cold. "What do you mean?" His voice cracked. "What are you saying? We can still call, right? Text. I can visit Tokyo. It doesn't have to end just because." Itsuki shook his head with a small, almost apologetic smile. This week was real, but don't wait for me. Haru swallowed hard, the words trembling. A long, cold silence. Isuki inhaled softly. Then he turned. No dramatic pause, no final glance, just a quiet pivot of his body. The decision already made. His step steady as he walked toward the gates. Haru kept his eyes on the tiled floor, jaw tight, breast shaking, until the heat behind his eyelids finally broke, and a single tear fell, then another. And that was how it ended. Not with shouting, not with a kiss, but with two men standing in the same station and choosing different directions. Haru no longer woke to dorm alarms or hurried footsteps in a station. Those days lived somewhere far behind him now, blurred into a time he didn't visit often, except in the quiet between breath. Haru was in his 30s now, old enough that winter felt different on his skin, not sharper, just heavier. The kind of cold that settled into your bones and stayed. The farmhouse creaked as he stepped outside. Its wood older than him. Its warmth something he maintained now instead of inherited. This was Biei. Grandfather's land. Grandfather's truck. Grandfather's routine now carried by Haru's hands. He brushed snow from his sleeves, looked out over the long rows of white fields. His brother joined him, zipping his coat against the cold. You're up early. Delivery day, Haru said, lifting a crate into the truck bed. It's a special order. His brother studied the sky, the thickening clouds, the way snowflakes already floated heavier than an hour ago. Storms coming in fast. Haru nodded, not dismissing it, just accepting it. It's Sapporo, he said quietly. I'll be back before dinner. There was no rush in his voice. He closed the tailgate, took the thermos his brother handed him, and climbed into the truck. The seat molded under him, familiar, too familiar. He sat there for a moment, hands resting on the wheel, watching the snow drift over the fields. Time had passed, life had settled, and the boy he once was, the one who ran from one station and was left in another, felt like someone he could only meet in a dream now. Haru turned the key. The engine rumbled to life, and he eased onto the road. The truck moved slowly through the early light, mirrors dusted with snow, the heater sighing warm air against the glass. The landscape of Biei drifted past in long, familiar stretches, open fields blurring into one another, birch trees stripped bare, fences half buried in white. Snow tapped lightly at first, then a little heavier. A weather update crackled from the radio, visibility decreasing on the Sapporo route, advising drivers not to rush. Haru lowered the volume, letting the voice fade into a soft static. A slow, creeping haze settled over the distance, blurring the road ahead until it felt like he was driving into a watercolor. Haru tightened his grip. His breath fogged the car window lightly every time he exhaled. He turned the heater up a little more, the warmth brushing his knuckles in muted waves. The truck ahead of him was only a pair of dim red lights, hovering like blurred sparks in the snow. Haru blinked, focused, kept steady. The world around him had grown quieter, as if the storm was inhaling before speaking. By the time Haru reached Sapporo Station, the storm had eased into a quiet curtain of snow, thick but gentle, as if winter had decided to behave for the last few kilometers. He pulled into the outdoor loading area, tires crunching over frozen slush, the truck settling with a soft hiss of heat against the cold. For a moment, he just sat there, breathing, letting the engine die down, letting his body relax in the way it always did, after a long drive through a disappearing roads. The world was peaceful again, almost tender. Haru stepped out into the cold, boots sinking slightly into the packed snow. He walked to the back of the truck, hands pulling at the cold metal latch. It stuck once, then gave way with a soft clank. Breast fogged in front of him, in pale clouds, As he reached in for the first crate, the moment felt ordinary, routine, a simple delivery. He lifted the crate out, hand steady, footsteps slow on the icy ground. A distant car horn echoed, not sharp, not alarming, just the normal kind you hear in a busy station lot. Haru didn't turn. He shifted the crate to his other arm, closed the truck bed with his elbow, and took 2 steps toward the loading entrance. Just 2. The sound hit first, tires sliding, rubber skidding hard across ice, the engine revving too loud, too close. Haru's breast caught. He turned his head instinctively, too late. A car burst through the sheer of falling snow. Out of control, a dark shape cutting across white. A single violent jolt knocked the crate from his arms. It hit the ground. Wood splintered. Glass shattered. The sound scattered like tiny bells across the snow. Haru felt his back slam against metal. The world tilted, then folded. Snowflakes drifted over him, falling out of rhythm, with the panic in the air. Voices blurred. Footsteps rushed. Haru's gaze drifted upward, past the falling snow, past the glare turning his vision white, until it landed on the sign above him, Sapporo Station. They say your life passes by in pictures, in moments like this. But Haru didn't see his whole life. He saw the sign. He saw snow. And then, 2 faces rose through the whiteness. Quiet, warm, painful. Like the last winters he never managed to leave behind. His eyes softened, closed. Some endings don't echo. They fall into the world softly, leaving nothing behind but stillness, and the name that won't return. There are winters that change us, winters that shape the years that follow, and winters we never learn to speak about. Because the person who held our words is gone. Grief doesn't arrive with warning. It comes in a call you weren't expecting, a message you read twice, a moment where your breast doesn't feel like yours. And when the world grows quiet again, you find yourself returning to the place Haru once stood, to the memories Haru left behind, to the silence that remained after him. This is Winter's Last Melody, Chapter 4, The Silence That Remained. Snow had begun to fall before dawn, softening the edge of the harbor town long before anyone woke. By the time Ren unlocked the door, the wooden chime above the door rang quietly as he stepped inside. The workshop was small, but it held everything Ren needed. A heater in the corner hummed to life the moment he switched it on. A single work table dominated the center of the room, worn smooth from years of use. He took off his gloves, placed them beside the heater, and set water to boil on the small electric kettle he kept near the tools. People came to him for different reasons: an heirloom that no longer played, a music box passed down from a grandmother, a gift someone wanted restored before a wedding anniversary. Ren never rushed. He treated each piece like a small memory. He liked that about the job. It asked for patience, attention, steady hands. It didn't ask for explanations. By mid-morning, worms had seeped into the room, fogging the lower corner of the window. Ren sat at the work table with magnifying visor pushed over his eyes, adjusting the positioning of a tiny spring. He held the part between tweezers, rotating it gently under the lamp. It was a delicate work, but he preferred that. Delicate things made sense. They told you what they needed if you listened. The kettle clicked off behind him. Ren set down the tweezers and poured himself a cup of tea, steam curling upward in thin, quiet ribbons. He leaned back in his chair, letting the warmth seep into his fingers. There were days he wondered how he had ended up here, in a small workshop on a side street of Otaru, living a life so different from the one he once imagined. He had chosen this life, piece by piece, quietly, deliberately, far from the noise of use, far from the expectation of Biei, far from memories that once shaped him. His workshop was small, but it was enough. The afternoon light shifted slowly across the workshop floor, dimming from pale silver to a muted winter gray. Ren was still seated at his work table, the tools neatly arranged. His phone buzzed on the counter. He didn't expect anyone, especially not at this hour. Ren glanced at the screen. Father. He picked it up immediately. His father's voice came through calm, steady, the tone of someone sharing news, not delivering a shock. Ren, you still at the shop? Ren waited, expecting something ordinary, but his father continued in the same even tone. You remember the Kawabata family? Ren's fingers stilled around the edge of the table. Yeah, he answered quietly. I remember. They called us this afternoon, his father said. Their son passed away last night. Ren didn't move. His father repeated gently, unaware of the stillness foaming on the other end. Their youngest son passed sometimes overnight. Haru? His father paused, surprised Ren had connected the name so quickly. Yes, Haru. It's unfortunate. His father continued. With the storm coming in, your mother and I don't think we can make it tomorrow. Roads might close. Could you attend the service on our behalf? Ren swallowed. Yeah, I can go. Good. Dress warm and call us after, all right? A few more ordinary words were exchanged before the call ended. Ren set the phone down on the work table. His hand didn't lift away. The workshop, usually warm and humming gently with purpose, felt suddenly hollow, as if the air had thinned, as if sound itself had pulled away from him. Haru. Gone. The heater clicked once, then fell back into its soft hum. Ren remained seated, the phone still beside his hand, though the call had ended minutes ago. He didn't move. The workshop had never felt this quiet. The silence was different. It pressed against him. He lowered his gaze to the table, the tools, the tiny brass screws, the soft claws he meant to fold. Ren inhaled once. His chest tightened before he could stop it. Haru. He hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in years. He never needed to. It lived somewhere quieter than memory. He shut his eyes, and the years fell away in a single sharp slide. To a courtyard dusted in snow, to Haru's small, startled smile, to the sound of music box playing slightly off-key, to the warmth Ren had held too carefully and lost too easily. His throat tightened. He wasn't crying. Not yet. But the grief sat behind his ribs, a cold, aching weight that felt like something old finally cracking open. He pressed a hand over his mouth. Ren blinked hard, once, twice. A tear slipped before he could stop it. He brushed it away quickly. Another tear followed. Ren bowed his head, shoulders folding inward finally, to the name that had lived inside him. Long after he tried to move on, snow tapped softly against the window. The storm thickened, and in the silent workshop, where Ren had built his quiet life, a single name echoed back to him, a name he hadn't spoken aloud in years. Haru. The studio was warm with afternoon light, the kind that slipped through high windows and softened every surface it touched. Sewing machines buzzed in uneven rhythm across the room, needles rising and falling like a soft mechanical heartbeat. Isuki sat at his station near the back, shoulders relaxed, a half-finished charcoal wool coat draped across his knees. A clean silhouette, careful stitching. He ran his thumb across the seam, checking the tension. He liked the steadiness of it, the quiet focus, the small decision only his hands understood, the feeling of the fabric warming under his touch. He wasn't a full designer yet, still an assistant, but he had carved out a small, unofficial corner of the studio where he could create things that felt like his own. On the rack beside him hung a few coats he never sent, Pieces he had made over the years while thinking of Haru. The ones he had shipped up north over the years were gone, always to the same address, always signed for, never replied to. For Itsuki, that had been enough, knowing Haru received them, even if nothing was sent back. He reached for a new spool of thread, lifted it to the light, checking the color. Everything was normal, routine, predictable. Just an ordinary winter day in Tokyo. The hallway outside the sewing studio was narrow and bright, lined with pin sketches and framed magazines covers. Isuki stepped out only far enough to escape the hum of sewing machine, brushing a loose thread from his apron. His phone buzzed once. An unknown Hokkaido number lit up the screen. Isuki frowned slightly. He didn't recognize it. He answered politely, "This is Isuki?" A brief pause followed. Not the uncertain silence of a scam call, but the composed stillness of someone organizing difficult words. A man's voice came through, steady and formal. "Hello, is this Mori Isuki-san?" "Yes," Isuki replied slowly. "Who is this?" Another quiet breath on the other end. Measured. Heavy. "My name is Kawabara Yuto. I'm calling from Hokkaido." The surname nudged something faint in Itsuki's memory, but he didn't place it immediately. Not until Yuto continued. "I'm Haru's older brother." Isuki froze. Yuto's voice remained calm, not cold. "I'm very sorry to contact you like this. I found your number among Haru's old belongings." Isuki's hand tightened around the phone. Belongings. He already understood, but Yuto still had to say it. "Haru passed away last night." The hallway went silent. Isuki didn't breathe, didn't move, didn't speak. "I'm sorry," he whispered without thinking. "What?" Yuto's voice softened, but stayed steady. "Our family is holding a small funeral tomorrow in Otaru. I don't know how well you knew him, but I felt you should be informed." Isuki let out a small fractured breath, barely audible. "Thank you for calling." The call ended quietly. Isuki lowered the phone slowly, fingers trembling once before he forced them still. The hallway was unchanged. The sketches, the laughter faintly from the studio, the winter light. He pushed off the wall. He would never return to the same way again. Isuki stepped back into the studio without fully seeing it. The warm light scattered fabrics, the soft chatter. They blurred into a single distant wash of sound. Someone called his name once, lightly, but he didn't turn. He moved straight to his workstation. The urgency in his movement was unusual enough that one of them stood a little. "Isuki-san, is something wrong?" He shook his head once, too quickly. "Family emergency," he said, bowing apologetically. "I'm so sorry. I need to take a few days. I'll call." He didn't wait for permission. Didn't need it. They could see something had cracked open behind his eyes. He slung his bag over his shoulder, nearly forgetting the thread still looped around his wrist, pulling it free as he walked toward the elevator. The doors closed around him. He couldn't fall apart here. He wouldn't. He stepped out into the cold Tokyo air and started running. He didn't remember the street he crossed, only the rush of winter wind against his cheeks, and the dull thud of his boots on pavement. He reached his apartment faster than he should have, fumbling slightly with the keys before stepping inside. Everything felt too quiet. He set his bag down, exhaled shakily. Then he began to move. A small overnight duffel bag from the closet. He didn't pack thoughtfully, just grabbed what he needed, with the instinct of someone preparing for something they didn't want to face. He pulled open the drawer of his small cabinet and froze. Inside was the wrapped bundle he never touched, except to dust the shelf, the old music box he hadn't given away. His hand hovered before lifting it. He held it carefully, thumb brushing the worn edge of the cloth. The weight of it felt different today, heavier somehow, like he knew why it was being held. He placed it gently into his bag. He looked down at himself. He wasn't wearing black. He let out a small disbelieving exhale. Sweater off, jacket switched, hair pushed back with both hands, smoothing it down more forcefully than needed. He paused in front of the bathroom mirror. His reflection looked too calm for what he felt, but his eyes told the truth. He zipped his bag, turned off the lights, opened the door, then stood there in the doorway, hand on the knob, breath suspended, not prepared, just going. He locked the door quietly behind him and stepped back into the cold Tokyo hallway, the air already feeling different. He headed for the airport. Otaru was waiting, and Haru was gone. The snowfall had thickened by the time Ren reached the temple grounds in Otaru. The air was sharp with incense and winter grief. Inside the funeral hall was dim and still. Ren bowed at the entrance, then moved quietly along the right aisle. Haru's photograph, framed simply, lit softly from within, rested at the center of the altar. Ren felt something inside him tighten, then drop. He joined the line of mourners, palms pressed together, breast steady, eyes lowered. When it was his turn, he placed the white flower gently before the incense, bowed deeply. Ren kept his gaze on the floor. Only when the priest began chanting did he allow himself to lift his eyes again, taking in the room through a soft, distant blur. Haru's family stood near the front, shoulders held firmly, hands folded, faces composed in a way people who had lived through northern winters know how to be composed. Ren had helped families through loss before. He had watched neighbors and childhood friends say their last goodbyes. He understood how grief spread through a small town, quietly, collectively, with the weight dispersed across many hands. He offered what he could. When he saw the incense thinning, he rose to help replenish it. When Haru's mother swayed slightly while greeting a visitor, he stepped forward with a discreet glass of warm tea. He didn't say much. His presence was enough. Ren noticed movement near the entrance. A young man had slipped inside late. Dark coat dusted with snow, breath unsteady, posture tight. He took a hesitant step forward, bowing deeply toward the altar before finding a place near the side wall. Something about the way the stranger's fingers gripped the strap of his bag, the way he didn't look up, didn't breathe fully, the way he moved like someone holding the world together by threads. Ren felt it. This man knew Haru. He didn't know how, but he knew. When the chanting resumed for the closing rites, Ren found his gaze drifting toward the stranger again, a quiet awareness forming between two people who had never met. Someone else had lost him too. The wind hit Itsuki first, sharp, stinging, full of frozen needles that clung to his coat the moment he'd stepped out of the taxi. The temple grounds were quiet except for the storm. Snow swirled low across the stones, muffling every sound under a thick white hush. Itsuki bowed once at the entrance before slipping inside. Warmth met him immediately. He stopped a few steps in, letting his breath steady as the door slid shut behind him. His eyes lifted slowly. Haru's photograph rested at the center of the altar. Itsuki's chest tightened once. He bowed deeply, holding the pose a beat longer than necessary. His movement was controlled, deliberate, respectful, the kind of grace he had trained into himself after years of holding things in. When he placed the white flower before the incense, his fingertips trembled barely, just the smallest shift, the kind only he felt. He straightened, bowed again, and stepped back. Someone offered him a seat near the side wall. He accepted with a quiet nod. From where he sat, he could see the entire room. The altar glow, the flicker of candles. Haru family standing with straight backs and tired eyes. Itsuki folded his hand in his lap. He didn't blink often. He didn't trust himself to. The chanting began, low, rhythmic, familiar in a way he hadn't heard in years. A shape moved on the opposite side of the hall. A man, dark coat, quiet presence, head bowed. Isuki recognized nothing about him, but something in the man's posture resonated. Not the same grief as his, but a grief that belonged to Haru too. Isuki's gaze drifted back to the altar. He did not cry. He wouldn't. Not here. Not in front of strangers. Not when his hands felt like they were made of glass. The service continued. Prayers, incense, soft footsteps. Isuki stood only when everyone else did. He bowed toward the family. They thanked him politely. He stepped aside to pull out his phone, intending to check the time. A notification blinked on the screen. Flight canceled due to the severe weather. The words didn't sink in at first. Then his breast shuddered silently. He turned toward the exit. Snow slanting sideways outside. Wind shaking the bare branches. Panic flickered. Not loud, just deep. He looked around for someone local, someone who might know. His eyes landed on the man from earlier. Isuki stepped closer, clearing his throat softly. "Excuse me," he said, voice low, steady despite the cold clouding around his ribs. "Do you know if the trains are suspended too?" The man looked at him, and in that small second of shared winter silence, something unspoken passed between them. Around them, people murmured updates. Roads closing, visibility dropping, taxis stopping service. The storm had swallowed Otaru whole. Haru's father called out over the wind, offering calm hospitality through his grief. Several mourners bowed gratefully. Others hesitated, not wanting to impose. Isuki didn't move. His jaw worked once, a tiny motion, like he was holding everything steady by force. Ren stepped closer, keeping his tone gentle, not intrusive. "My workshop is 10 minutes from here," he said softly. "It's warm. There's a sofa, blankets. It'll get you through the night." Isuki's breast caught. "You sure?" His voice wasn't steady. Ren nodded once. "Yes." The temple bell hummed, a single low note stretching into the cold, and together without speaking further, they stepped into the winter night. The storm shoved against the street of Otaru as they reached the workshop, a narrow building glowing softly through layers of snow. Ren unlocked the door, and the warmth inside greeted them in a slow exhale. He switched on another lamp. "You can put your things anywhere," he said gently. Isuki nodded once. The workshop felt nothing like home, but it was warm, grounded, alive with the quiet hum of someone's crafts. Ren moved to the small kitchenette, setting 2 ceramic cups on the counter. "I'll warm the sake," he said. "It'll take a bit." Isuki murmured a soft "thank you," then wondered. Ren lit a small tabletop burner and poured sake into a tiny metal tokuri to heat. The soft crackle of the flame filled the room. Isuki's attention drifted to the shelves lining the workshop. Dozens of music boxes, all shapes, all woods, all quietly waiting. He stepped closer. His fingers hovered over one made of dark walnut, delicate flowers carved into its lid. He didn't open it, just looked. A craftsman's touch. Ren glanced over while handling the sake, but didn't interrupt. Isuki finally reached for a small one crafted in maple, simple in design. He turned the crank slowly. The tokuri clicked softly against the burner. Ren poured the warm sake into 2 small cups and walked toward him with one. Isuki accepted it with both hands, bowing lightly. They sat, Ren on the sofa edge, Isuki near the low table where the music box rested between them. The storm outside stretched against the windows, wind howling like something hollow and tired. Isuki took the first sip. Warmth spread slowly through his hands, then his chest. Then, Isuki's control cracked. Not loudly, not messily, just a trembling inhale that broke apart halfway through. A hand pressed against his mouth. shoulders quivering in small, restrained shudders. Ren looked away to give him privacy, jaw tightening, his own eyes burning. Outside, the wind rolled. Inside, the sake cooled in untouched cups as two men sat with the winter Haru left behind, not speaking, not touching, just existing through the ache until the night softened enough for them to breathe again. Some melodies return long after the moment they were written, not as a promise, but as a memory the world wasn't ready to release. There are winters that take from us, and winters that give back in ways we never expected. A name spoken in a cold room, a box held carefully in shaking hands, two men who once walked beside him, now standing in the quiet he left behind. Grief moves differently when shared. It softens at the edges. It finds room to breathe. It let the truth rise between people who never thought they would meet. And somewhere in the stillness, a small melody waits, unfinished, unresolved, holding the echo of the boy who shaped all their winters. This is Winter's last melody, Chapter 5, the melody that belonged to him. The quiet inside Ren's workshop settled slowly, like snow choosing where to land. The door had been closed for a while, the heater clicking softly as it fought the cold. Two men, both shaken in different corners of the same room, tried to steady themselves again. Ren remained near the workbench, hands braced on the wood he trusted. Across the room, Isuki wiped the last trace of tears from his face before speaking to his boss, apologetic, restrained, explaining the flights were suspended. When he hung up, neither man spoke. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was simply delicate. Isuki finally set his phone down and reached into his travel bag. His movements were careful, deliberate. Wrapped in a soft cloth, he drew out a small wooden object, the music box he had carried for years. Ren's eyes shifted the moment it touched the workbench. Recognition flickered. The stubborn way Haru's early work always held tiny imperfections like the fingerprints. Isuki unwrapped the cloth fully. "It broke a while ago," he said quietly. Ren reached forward, fingertips brushing the cranked hinge, the loosened gears. Ren exhaled once, the sound small, almost warm. "I can fix it," he said. The relief in Itsuki's postures was subtle but clear. He nodded, stepping closer to watch Ren examine the inner mechanism. "Haru gave it to me," Itsuki said. Ren paused only a breath, and then nodded once, gently. The workshop light softened over the broken box. Snow pressed lightly against the window as Ren began to work, and the silence between the two men shifted. No longer heavy, simply shared. Ren worked in silence at first, not out of avoidance, but because the music box demanded a kind of attention that left no room for haste. He spread a clean cloth across the workbench, placed each tool in a precise line, then lifted the lid again with a gentleness that made Itsuki's breath ease without him meaning to. The gears inside were shifted. One screw had nearly worn through its thread. The hinge had split cleanly at the seam, a break that said more about years than neglect. Isuki watched quietly from the opposite side of the workbench, hands folded in front of him, his travel coat still hanging off one shoulder. He didn't lean close or hover. He just stood there, as if staying still might keep the memory from slipping. Ren lifted the hinge, tested the give, then reached for a fine-headed screwdriver. "We were in the same club," Ren said. "Craft work, instruments. He stayed late a lot, tried too hard most days." Isuki absorbed that slowly, just listening. Ren adjusted the tiny gear, rotated the axle, and set it down. "He gave you this?" he asked. Isuki nodded. "A long time ago." Ren's hand still for a moment, barely a pause, before he continued soothing the worn edge of the wood. Another silence followed, softer this time. Ren straightened, lifted the lid gently, and tested the tension of the repaired hinge. It held. Isuki let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Ren didn't smile, but something eased in his shoulders. "Thank you," Isuki said quietly. Ren simply nodded. Two men standing over the same memory, letting the room warm around them inch by inch. Isuki sat down first, the repaired music box resting in his hands, as if it were still fragile. Ren joined him a moment later, the heater's soft hum filling the room with a steady, muted warmth. Neither spoke. Isuki brushed his thumb over the lid, once lightly, then lifted it. The first note was small, tentative, almost shy, a thin chime that wavered as though remembering how to exist. The sake-filled cup sat untouched beside them. Ren reached for one cup, paused, then looked at Itsuki. "You want to finish the sake?" he asked. Itsuki let out a breath, a small one, almost a laugh without the sound. "Yeah," he said. "I think I do." Ren poured slowly. Their first sip was quiet, the warmth spreading gently through the cold edges of the room. For a while, they said nothing, not out of discomfort, but because the night didn't ask for noise. Itsuki's fingers drifted back to the music box, tracing the smooth edge of the lid. He hesitated. "You knew him well?" he said quietly. Ren set his cup down, fingers brushing the wood of the table, grounding himself, steadying the place where memory threatened to rise. Then in a voice just above a whisper he spoke. "There was a time when Haru and I were close." And the night finally began to open. The sake warmed slowly between them, thinning the cold that had clung to their shoulders since the funeral. Pieces of their story surfaced gradually, the quiet way Itsuki's gaze lingered on the box, remembering a time when Haru had placed it in his hands, that they had known Haru in different time. Ren's memories came from youth, long hours in workshop rooms at the university. Haru frustrated with tools he barely understood, the brightness that drew people in before he ever realized it. Itsuki carried a later version, a steadier Haru, softened by experience, more deliberate in his warmth, less unsure of where to place his affection. Two separate histories, never meant to overlap, now sitting side by side in a quiet winter workshop. The sake moved them closer to the truth. Haru had changed between their lives, and yet somehow, he had remained himself. It wasn't an exchange of stories. It was a quiet alignment, a winter truth settling into place. Morning came quietly, as if unsure whether to touch the night they had left behind. The storm had blown itself out in the early hours, leaving Otaru wrapped in a soft blue-white stillness. Snow clung thick against the workshop windows. Ren stepped out first, boots sinking into a new snow with a muffled sound. The cold met him cleanly. He exhaled, breast turning white in the morning air. Isuki followed a moment later, pulling his coat tighter around himself. His eyes scanned the pale sky, the thin line of sun lifting slowly over the distant houses. The world felt quieter than the night before. A small radio near the door murmured, weather updates from inside the workshop. Roads partially cleared, buses running again, trains expected to resume by afternoon, airport still closed. Isuki listened without reacting. He had already accepted he wasn't returning to Tokyo today. Ren closed the workshop door gently, locking it. The repaired music box was wrapped, carefully, and tucked in Itsuki's bag, resting between spare clothes and a few crumpled papers. A memory now whole again, waiting for its place. Itsuki looked toward the street, toward the snow-covered car waiting under a soft drift. "Shall we say hello to Haru?" Ren nodded once. There was no hesitation in either of them. Not in the way they moved toward the car. Not in the way Ren brushed the snow from the windshield. Not in the way Itsuki held the bag a little closer, as if aware of its gravity. They weren't returning for themselves. They weren't returning for closure. They were returning because Haru's memory asked for it. Ren started the engine. Isuki settled into the passenger seat. The drive was almost soundless. The heater filled the car with muted warmth, but neither Ren nor Isuki spoke. The morning seemed to ask for quiet, and they honored it. They passed a turn toward the temple district. Isuki noticed, but didn't question it. He understood intuitively, the way one recognized a truth without words, that the funeral wasn't a place for what they carried. Funerals were for farewells spoken in public. What they held wasn't public. Haru's body lay at temple for visitors, condolences, rituals. But his life, the piece that shaped the boy they each knew, lived in Biei, in the fields, in the farmhouse, in the quiet corners of Biei he had never stopped returning to. Snowfields unfurled on both sides of the road. Ren had driven these passes in younger years, back when Haru would insist on taking the long route, so they could talk about nothing and everything at once. Isuki had never been to Biei, but the landscape felt strangely honest, as if it held something Haru had never been able to say aloud. Ren slowed the car as they approached the familiar wooden fence. The farmhouse stood still in the morning light, a thin trail of smoke rising from the chimney, the field stretching wide and untouched behind it. They stepped out into the cold. Itsuki stood still for a moment, taking in the quiet. They didn't walk toward the house right away. Instead, they wandered the grounds, following the shape of fences, the storage shed. Ren walked ahead at first, boots sinking into snow with a muted crunch. Isuki trailed a few steps behind, his gaze drifting across the field, as if trying to imagine Haru's footsteps layered beneath the snow. The farm held its own kind of silence, not mournful, but familiar, like a place that had waited through many winters for someone to return. Every now and then Ren paused to look over the land. Isuki stopped near the old swing frame, half buried in snow, its rope stiff with frost. He didn't touch it, only watched how the light landed on the seat, wondering if Haru had once sat there, legs kicking forward under the summer skies. It felt right to walk first, to breathe this air. They rounded the side of the house, boots leaving thin trails behind them. The snow muffled everything, their steps, their breath, the soft creak of distant branches, until the silence felt almost protective. Only then did the farmhouse door open. A farm worker stepped out, bundled in a thick jacket, rubbing his hands for warmth. He looked surprised to see visitors, scanning them for a moment. Ren lifted a hand in greeting. "We're Haru's friends," he said quietly. The worker's expression shifted, not shocked, but softened by recognition of the funeral, of the few who might come today. "Yes, please come in." He stepped aside, holding the door open against the cold. "The family is still at the funeral hall," he said gently. "But they told me, if any of Haru's friends came by, you're welcome to look around, especially his room." Isuki lowered his head, a quiet thank you forming in the small movement. Ren nodded once, breeze drifting in the cold air. They followed the worker across the porch, toward the warm light spilling from inside, toward the place where Haru had lived. The door closed softly behind them. The farmhouse interior held the warmth of a place used daily. The worker led them to a short hallway and stepped back, nodding toward the second door. "That's Haru's room," he said softly. "Everything's as he left it." Then he returned to his chores, leaving Itsuki and Ren alone. Ren pushed the door open first. Haru's room was the room of a man who had settled into a quieter season of life, the life he chose after years of drifting. The bed was neatly made, blanket corners tucked with a habit formed through a routine rather than careful appearance. A single pillow, slightly indented. A folded sweater at the foot of the bed. Isuki stepped inside slowly, eyes scanning the space with a reverence that came from seeing the version of Haru he never fully knew. The Haru who returned to his farmhouse year after year until it became where he stayed. Ren's gaze found the bedside table almost immediately. The music box, the odd, uneven sculpture-like piece he had crafted in university, sat there. A thin layer of dust softening its edges. Ren didn't touch it, but his breath shifted, quiet and contained. Isuki paused near the wooden rack. A familiar winter coat hung there, the one he had sent Haru during a cold Tokyo season. Not new anymore. The cuff slightly worn, the color muted from use. Haru had worn it. Often. Everything spoke quietly of life and motion, one Haru had been living fully, even if gently, even if privately. Ren took a slow step deeper into the room. Isuki stayed near the doorway, each taking a different side of a life Haru had built after drifting out of theirs. There was no dramatic realization, no tears, only a room that felt real, immediate, and warm. A space that made Haru's absence sharper, and yet strangely comforting. This was the version of Haru the world saw last, the version who had finally chosen a home, a rhythm, a steadiness, a man neither of them fully knew, but both recognized. Ren's shoulders eased. Itsuki's breast steadied. The room didn't feel empty. It felt paused. Haru's room held them gently, the way quiet places sometimes hold grief for people who don't know how to place it. Ren stood near the bedside table, Itsuki near the desk, neither rushing, neither trying to fill the space with words. It felt wrong to move too quickly, and equally wrong to linger. Itsuki reached into his bag and lifted the repaired music box, wrapped still in the cloth Ren had used the night before. His hands were steady, not trembling, not unsure, simply respectful. He crossed the small room, each step soft against the warm wooden floor, and stopped at Haru's desk. There was enough space cleared at the center, a natural gap among the notebook and the farm logs, as if this was where Haru might have placed something he meant to return to. Isuki kept his hands on the cloth for a moment, before letting it fall open, and placed it on the desk. He stepped aside. Ren watched from a few steps away, breath slowing in a soft, steady rhythm. The gesture didn't startle him. It felt right, as though the box had finally found its way back to the place it had been meant to rest. Ren approached then. He didn't reach for the box either. He only stood close enough that the melody seemed as if it could rise if either of them wanted it. Ren lowered his head slightly, a gesture small yet full, as if acknowledging the years between the boy he once knew and the men who lived in this room. Isuki gazed softened at the coat hanging, worn, used, loved in a way he'd never been told, but could now plainly see. For a long moment, they simply stood there, not remembering the same Haru, not grieving him the same way, but honoring him side by side in the space he last called home. When they finally stepped back from the desk, the room stayed warm, as though Haru was still walking its edges. They stepped out of the farmhouse together, boots meeting the cold with a soft, steady crunch. The door clicked shut behind them. The winter air felt different now, not harsh, not biting, just clean. The kind of cold that met you with clarity rather than weight. Ren pulled on his gloves while Izuki adjusted the strap of his bag. Their movements unhurried, shaped by a calm that had settled into them only minutes earlier. The yard stretched open before them, covered in a thin layer of fresh snow. Their earlier footprints crossed the ground in wavering lines, looping around the barn and the side paths where they had walked before being invited inside. They started toward the car at the same time. The snow underfoot grew firmer near the parked car. "I can take you to Sapporo Station." Isuki nodded. "Thank you. That would help." Ren opened the door. The heater hummed softly as the engine started. Snow shifted beneath the tires. As they pulled onto the narrow farm road, the farmhouse shrank behind them, becoming a warm square of light in the white. And slowly, gently, the snowfall erased their footprints. Some melodies don't end when the hands that made them are gone. They stay in the room they once filled, in the people who carried them forward, in the quiet place where love was left unfinished. A winter can hold many stories, the ones we shared, the ones we were too young to understand, and the ones we return to only when the world grows still enough to listen. For Ren and Izuki, this winter was not a beginning and not a second chance. It was a soft, unbroken truce that loving someone leaves a shape in us, and carrying the shape is its own kind of grace. The snow will fade, the roads will open, their lives will move again. This was Winter's last melody, Chapter 5, the melody that belonged to him. And though this story closes here, more stories wait beyond this winter. Please like the video and subscribe to Gay Audiobooks. Thank you. The winters we let go.